Hey everyone, tonight we are going to journey into the heart of an unforgettable survival tale, one of fear, resilience, and the raw power of the human spirit. This story follows my desperate flight from a brutal kidnapping gang deep within the Amazon rainforest, where every shadow hides a threat and every breath of humid air is a reminder of how close death can be. You'll feel the sting of insect bites, the taste of sweat and rain on your lips, and the thunderous pulse of fear in your veins as I recount the moments when hope seemed as scarce as dry land beneath my feet. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now enjoy a cup of hot tea and let's embark on this journey together tonight. I stumbled free from the undergrowth and froze, every muscle clenched, as dawn's first pale light filtered through the canopy. Hours earlier, I had been trekking with my expedition group, 5 of us researchers mapping riverside flora. We were laughing over muddy boots, swapping anecdotes, marveling at orchids the size of dinner plates. But in a careless moment, I had trailed too far behind, enthralled by the scarlet blossoms clinging to a fallen log. The next thing I knew, the jungle swallowed me whole. Now alone, I knelt on the damp leaf-strewn floor, hands pressed flat against decaying foliage, and realized the terrible truth: my companions were out of sight. The laughter and chatter had vanished like mist at sunrise, leaving only the ceaseless hum of cicadas and the distant drip of water from leaves. My heart hammered as adrenaline flooded my veins. I rose on unsteady legs, testing the ground beneath me, scanning the dense wall of green in every direction. Towering trees arched overhead, their trunks slick with moss and vines snaking upward like living ropes. Beams of light pierced the gloom in golden shafts, illuminating motes of mist that drifted through the humid air. A tangle of branches barred any easy path. I rubbed sweat from my forehead, hot droplets mingling with the grime and insect repellent still clinging to my skin. My backpack, heavy with equipment and emergency rations, felt like a lead weight strapped to me. Panic collided with disbelief, how quickly I had slipped from safety into this vast hostile realm. Memories of our guide's stern warning echoed in my mind: never wander alone. The Amazon does not forgive foolishness. But I had been careless, thinking myself cautious, assuming the group was close behind. Now that assumption lay shattered like a broken oar on a fast river. I tested a shallow path between 2 banyan trees, waterlogged earth soggy beneath my boots. Every step sank slightly, releasing the pungent scent of rot. Beneath me, a chorus of unseen insects stirred. A rustle to my left froze me mid-step. My breath caught. I spun hard in my throat, but the underbrush was motionless. Only the fleeting flash of a bird's wing disturbed the silent tapestry of greens and browns. My rational mind told me it was nothing a peccary or a toucan, but my gut snapped taut. This was where predators lurked: jaguars slinking on padded paws, anacondas coiling unseen in murky water, and worse, unpredictable human threats. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. Panic could be as lethal as a panther. The ground sloped gently downward, and I spotted a faint depression that might hold a trail. Branches overhead dripped condensation, a steady rhythmic tapping that felt like a metronome to my rising heartbeat. Each droplet was a warning time was slipping away. I recalled the map etched into my memory. The river lay east, perhaps the half a day's trek. But orientation in the Amazon was a trick. Every bend looked the same, every tree stump a possible landmark. I clenched my jaw and pressed forward, pausing whenever a new noise erupted, a distant crash, fallen timber, or footsteps. I froze, fighting the urge to sprint, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. If the group noticed my absence quickly, they might backtrack, but if not, I would be on my own until rescue. The backpack straps chafed my shoulders. A trickle of blood wove through the fabric where a vine had caught me. Ignoring the sting, I focused on breathing evenly, counting each inhalation like a lifeline. Time stretched, sun climbed toward midday, yet the jungle floor remained dim under the canopy's vaulted ceiling. Muscles burned with every climb over root and log. Sweat stung my eyes. I blinked it away and scanned for any sign of human passage, a broken twig, a flattened patch of grass. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted faint footprints pressed into the soft earth, too small for my boots. Likely an animal, but also proof I was not the only creature here. Relief and dread twisted inside me. I marked my path on a mental map north, then east. By late morning, I came upon a tangle of vines draped across a fallen acai palm. In the shallow depression beneath, I sank to my knees and gulped water from a leaking pouch, tepid, slightly grimy, but life-giving. I closed my eyes against the forest's dizzying swirl, letting the noise and heat wash over me. For a moment, I let myself be just a person lost in a green abyss, adrift and afraid. Then I remembered why I could not give in somewhere out there. My colleagues, my family, and the promise of tomorrow waited. I rose, steadied my shoulders, and set my jaw. The Amazon had swallowed me, but it had not defeated me. One careful step after another, I pushed onward, determined to find the river or anything that would lead me back to safety. My pulse ratcheted higher as I pressed on each snapped twig and shifting leaf, sending jolts of fear through my veins. The river's distant roar sparked hope, but my senses told a darker story. I was not alone. Footprints, crude and hurried, marred the soft mud beside my own tracks. Their irregular depth betrayed bare or lightly shod feet, perhaps rubber sandals, the kind worn by locals or unscrupulous intruders. I crouched, tracing a jagged print with a trembling fingertip. The toes, splayed in desperation, heel pressed deep into the earth. Someone had passed this way, chasing or fleeing from something equally savage. Leaning close, I studied the surrounding underbrush. Stems of young palms were broken low, snapped under human weight. Smaller branches lay strewn across my intended path, as though deliberately scattered to slow pursuit. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed that danger lurked just beyond the next stand of towering cebos. I peered into the emerald gloom, half expecting to see eyes glinting back at me. The silence pressed in, broken only by the thrum of cicadas and the distant percussion of water. Yet that silence was deceptive, a lull that foretold an ambush. I backtracked a few paces and crouched behind a buttress root, watching the muddy trail. Sweat slicked my palms, despite the shade, and I swallowed hard. The prints reappeared, heading eastward, exactly the direction I'd chosen. Whoever carved them had been trailing me, not fleeing. Fear twisted in my gut. If they were a hunting party, their weapons might already be cocked leveled. I had no idea whether they were intent on helping me or ensuring I never escaped. Memories of the kidnapping flashed unbidden rough hands, dragging me from my tent, voices barking orders in broken Spanish as machetes flashed at the campfire's edges. The men had not been gentle. My breath caught. A low rustle sounded ahead. I froze, chest tight. The footprints paused there, forming a small circle in the mud, as though the pursuer hesitated. Then a branch cracked sharply, too deliberate to be an animal dislodging dead leaves. I pressed my cheek to the root, fighting the urge to cry out. Movement flickered at the corner of my vision, half a silhouette weaving between trunks. I ducked deeper, praying my camouflage of mud and shadow would hide me. A single bird call brayed overhead, and my mind raced through options. Could I hide until nightfall? Darkness might give me cover. The jungle at night turned treacherous, but at least a human sight dimmed. But lingering risked discovery by more determined trackers. I needed diversion. Scanning the forest floor, I seized a fallen palm frond and scampered sideways, snapping twigs deliberately to draw the noise away from my actual path. The sinew of adrenaline and fear pulsed through my limbs. I darted in a shallow arc around my concealed spot, then crouched again among a thicket of young lianas. My ears strained for footsteps, but all I heard was the forest's chorus, the drumming drums of insects, a faint guano bird's shriek, water dripping rhythmically from leaf to leaf. I closed my eyes, counting breaths until the clamoring in my head steadied. No footsteps. My gambit had worked for now, but this jungle was a labyrinth, an elaborate puzzle of tree trunks and vines. My decoy might buy only minutes. I needed to find a route that offered real concealment, a dense tangle of lianas overhead and thick buttresses at ground level. I rose on silent feet and retraced my diversion path, careful to reset some branches so the circle of broken stems looked undisturbed. Then I veered north toward a cluster of fallen logs, half submerged in mud. Their tangled forms created a shadowed corridor. As I slipped between them, I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing on me. Every sense screamed vigilance. My boots squelched softly, my pack shifted tools clinking inside a hidden canvas pocket. I bit my lip, drawing in a slow breath. No moon loomed, daylight filtered thinly. The river's roar grew louder, promising escape, but also drawing me back toward the kidnappers' likely route. If they tracked me to the riverbank, where they might camp or hide dugout canoes, I'd be trapped. I scanned for another way, higher ground, an untracked feeder stream or a game trail. Animals used often paths too narrow for human footprints. A narrow, almost invisible trail snaked between two rampart roots. My shoulders brushed wet bark as I pressed through. Small claw marks gouged into the damp wood, possibly coatimundi or jaguarundi, but also evidence of life more primal and feral than my pursuers. I followed the animal trail uphill, every step a gamble. Roots rose like ribs, and slippery earth threatened to betray my progress. At one point, I caught a flicker of movement, a blue morpho butterfly vibrant against the drab forest, fluttered past its wings, catching the light. For an instant, it felt like reassurance. Life persisted here despite the darkness. Then it vanished, and my heart sank. Beauty offered little protection. As I crested a small rise, I glimpsed the muddy expanse of my earlier footprints, my own signature inked in the forest's journal. Beside them, a fresh set of marks paralleled mine. The pursuer had followed my deliberate detour. Anger and fear mingled. Someone had been watching me since before dawn, adapting to every twist I'd left. They were patient, methodical. Their intent must be singular and ruthless. I shook my head to clear thoughts. Panic would be my downfall. I needed to use the Amazon's complexity as my shield. The dense canopy above was my ally. Shafts of sunlight illuminated pockets of mist, creating a mosaic that would scatter tracks and distort angles. I paused, knelt beside the twin prints, and dug a finger into the fresh mud, smearing their crisp edges into a shapeless blob. Then I kicked soil and leaves over the spot, erasing the evidence. My own footprint I left clear, then circled back upon it, breaking it up to resemble deer prints. If anyone followed, they'd be tracking wildlife, not a lone human, and might dismiss the signs. A sudden crack to my right jolted me upright. I whirled, half expecting a face. Nothing. Yet the forest felt alive with menace. Every twist of a vine, every whisper of breeze through pandan leaves hinted at hidden watchers. My muscles bunched taut like drawn bowstrings. I couldn't risk heading downhill toward the riverbank without securing a distraction or an ambush point of my own. I glanced back to the rise and saw a deadfall 4 meters up, a massive trunk bridging 2 buttress roots. If I could shimmy atop it, I might pass above ground level, where tracks faded and the undergrowth grew spare. It looked risky, the logs slick with moss, its height a fall of several meters into rocky, root-strewn soil. But desperation lent boldness. With trembling arms, I grasped the nearest root and hauled myself onto the log, testing its solidity. It groaned under my weight, but held. Ahead, the canopy opened slightly rays of sunlight, painting patches on the forest floor. If I could make it across, the tracks on the ground would vanish entirely. I exhaled, heart pounding, and inched forward, each careful step accompanied by the log's low creak. Leaves drifted down around me, blind witnesses to my gamble. Midway across, a sharp lick rang behind me like a twig underfoot. I froze so suddenly that my leg muscles trembled. The forest stilled as though holding its breath. A faint rustle rose up the hill slope, and a shadow passed beneath me. I dared not look down. I dared not breathe too deeply. Time slowed every second, stretching into an eternity. Then the rustle faded into the hum of insects. The log sagged slightly. Relief flooded me. With deft precision, I launched myself to the far root landing with a muffled thud. My pack shifted, but I caught it rolling to absorb impact. Below, the jungle resumed its song. I scrambled down, pulling loose leaves from my clothing so no telltale patches of mud clung where they shouldn't. As I reached the forest floor, I felt a surge of triumph. I had outwitted my pursuer, at least for now. But the signs remained somewhere in the vines and shadows. Someone watched and waited. My muscles coiled for the next phase of this deadly game. The Amazon was no passive stage. It was an active participant, testing my wits, my endurance, my will to survive. And although danger still stalked me, I recognized that each narrow escape taught me more about these woods and about my own resolve. I paused, heart hammering, and listened carefully. No broken twigs, no unseen footfalls. The forest seemed to acknowledge my victory with a gentle breeze that rustled the canopy overhead. Then I turned eastward again, pressing on toward the river, each step measured and silent. The chase continued, and I would not be caught. Dusk's gilded shafts faded to charcoal by the time I realized I could no longer press eastward. The canopy thickened overhead, funneling the last embers of daylight into shimmering shafts that danced across the leaf litter. Night in the Amazon arrives with sudden, suffocating totality. Temperature drops only marginally, but the chorus of frogs and insects swells until the forest feels alive, with 1,000 unseen wings and legs. I needed shelter, and I needed it now. My hands shook as I dropped my pack onto the ground. Every muscle burned from the morning's frantic flight. Sweat plastered my shirt to my back. Yet adrenaline still crackled through my veins. If I slowed down before building refuge, predators, both human and an animal, could be upon me in seconds. I slapped at swarms of mosquitoes rising in clouds around my head, cursing the humid air that clung to my skin. My headlamp lay buried in the hidden pocket of my pack, useless until daylight fully slipped away, but I had a small emergency whistle and a flint in a waterproof case. Those at least might help if I got into serious trouble overnight. I scanned for a suitable spot, slightly elevated to avoid pooling water, clear of heavy branches that might crash down and close enough to cover, to conceal me. A natural hollow between two buttress roots caught my eye. Towering fig trees formed a semicircle around it, their roots arching like protective ribs. The ground beneath was slightly raised and firm, probably a termite mound long since abandoned. If I could clear away the leaf litter and build a roof of fronds and branches, I might have a cramped but livable hideout until dawn. First, I needed fire, or at least a windbreak. The undergrowth here was thick vines, ferns, and thorny palms, tangled in chaotic layers. I pulled my machete from its sheath, careful to avoid the rusted hunting traps I might stumble upon. Each sweep of the blade sent insects scattering. Each slash freed a plume of beaten-down greenery that reeked of rot. I worked quickly, clearing a small rectangle about 2 meters wide. My arms ached, but the promise of a refuge propelled me onward. Next, I gathered long palm fronds and sturdy lianas. The fronds' waxy surfaces would shed water, and the lianas could lash the shelter together. I dragged the heaviest branches away from the makeshift floor, setting them aside for the frame. Finding straight forked twigs of about 1 meter's length, I wedged them horizontally between the fig roots and a fallen trunk, creating a skeletal lean-to. Shadows lengthened around me, The forest exhaled as day ended. I worked with grim determination, hands stinging as blisters formed. Fireflies blinked around the treetops, tiny lanterns in the gloom. My heartbeat thundered, but I forced breathing steady. I needed to be ready before the full orchestra of night erupted. With the frame in place, I piled palm fronds thickly over the top, tucking their ends beneath the lower supports to keep the wind from yanking them away. Rain could come without warning, and water pooling on a flat surface would turn my bed to mud. Underneath, I layered dry leaves and soft palm fibers for insulation. The ground felt oddly hollow beneath the mound, as if I'd intruded on some subterranean chamber. I pressed the bedding flat, then removed my boots and socks, wringing out the sweat-soaked fabric. Sleep socks. I reminded myself bitterly useless if I couldn't rest. I laid out my thin emergency blanket atop the bedding, tucking it to form a pocket that might reflect some warmth. In this jungle, warmth was relative. It would never be cold enough to numb only refreshing against the oppressive humidity. A distant hoot sounded an owl or potu marking territory. The droning of cicadas rose to a fever pitch, and from the darkness came the unmistakable hiss of a snake, perhaps a boa or fer-de-lance hidden in the undergrowth. I froze, heart hammering, and gripped my flashlight. A ribbon of light swept across tangled vines and leafless twigs, revealing nothing. The hiss repeated softer, now swallowed by the insect cacophony. I swallowed and told myself not to imagine monsters. This was home to them. My shelter needed to conceal me from humans, but my true camouflage would be moving as little as possible. By the time I secured the final frond, darkness reigned supreme. My headlamp flicked on its narrow beam, slicing through the black. Tiny motes danced in the light dust, and moisture suspended like glitter. I dusted sweat from my brow and surveyed my work, a crude, triangular hut about shoulder width inside, inviting if claustrophobic. It wouldn't stop a machete, but might deter predators who sniffed something out of place. I knew the gang that had taken me once wouldn't sleep without a fire and a camp. They'd expect me to flee until physical exhaustion set in. But I refused to let exhaustion claim me. I rummaged in my pack for a bottle of water. Each gulp felt like salvation, cold and sweet, against my parched throat. I chewed a single energy bar, stale, but dense with calories. My stomach roiled, but the thought of digestion in this swampy heat made me queasy. I forced the first few bites, then set the rest aside, wrapped in a leaf to keep them from ants and beetles. There was no mirror of water or stream nearby. Any reflection of light risked revealing my position. Instead, I placed some smooth stones I'd found at the edge of the clearing as makeshift markers, a lukewarm comfort that at least I could find my way back if I ventured out before dawn. My pack lay just outside tools oriented for a quick grab. The flint and whistle I slipped into my shirt pocket. Inside my shelter, the air was nauseatingly still. Mosquitoes probed for unprotected skin, and I slapped at them until my palms stung. I couldn't risk a fire spark that might attract attention, but the darkness gnawed at my pride. I thought of my family, picturing them, watching a screen halfway across the world, unaware I was stranded in this living tomb. Guilt tightened around my chest, If I didn't survive, they'd be haunted by the what-ifs. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing in for 4 counts, out for 4. The rhythm steadied my mind. I revisited the escape routes stored in memory, the Eastern River possible tributaries, old logging trails known only to locals. Sleep was a dangerous luxury, but exhaustion threatened to rob me of vigilance. I resolved to rest in short bursts, waking every half hour to scan for movement and listen for sounds out of place. A distant splatter echoed raindrops beginning to fall. I pressed my back against the far wall, listening as the rain pattered on the fronds above water, drumming a staccato lullaby. My shelter remained dry, the palm leaves slope, channeling moisture away. The forest drank deeply, and the rain carried its musky scent. I allowed my eyelids to droop, every nerve primed for alert. The rain's steady beat and the distant calls of night creatures created an eerie symphony. I pressed my flashlight button lightly, casting just enough glow to see the frond's underside and the curve of the root walls. Then I lay my head on my folded arm and welcomed the darkness creeping at the edges of my consciousness. Just a few minutes, long enough to mend frayed strength, but not so long I'd be defenseless. If the gang or any predator came close, I'd whistle and run, relying on the canopy to hide my figure until daylight. My thoughts drifted to the horizon, to dawn's promise, and I clung to that fragile hope like a lifeline. I jolt awake to a snap of wood, the sound far too deliberate to be rain or falling debris. My heart spikes in the inky dark as I press my palm to the whistle in my pocket, reminding myself that silence is my greatest ally. Outside, the rain's patter has softened to a light drizzle, but now something else cuts through the rhythm, muffled human voices, low and urgent, and the distant echo of a shout that sends a cold wave of fear through my veins. I lie perfectly still, listening. The voices ebb and flow, words indistinct Spanish, maybe Portuguese spoken harshly and clipped. My blood runs cold at the realization this is not wildlife. The gang, they must have circled back and found my trail. My mind flickers to the night they took me, rough hands clamping over my mouth, the crack of a machete splitting air, the heavy thud of boots on canvas as they dragged me into a waiting canoe. I taste sweat and bile in my throat, just recalling the panic that had slammed into me like a wave. A shouted command closer now collides with my memory. I force myself to breathe calmly in for 4 counts, out for 4. Panic would fracture my focus. I remember the emergency whistle's piercing tone, ineffective against experienced trackers, but still a tool. And the flint I could spark a brief flash to ignite panic in them, buy me a moment. But fire would betray my position in an instant. Better to hide and wait. My makeshift shelter offers me cover, but only if I don't move. I roll onto my side, pressing face to the cool root wall. The dirt beneath my cheek is damp, but comforting in its simplicity. The forest floor hums with life, the distant rasp of large insects, the soft rustle of palm fronds stirred by a gentle breeze. Yet beneath those natural sounds, human voices drift closer, weaving a pattern of dread. A soft crunch of leaves alerts me that someone is stepping into my clearing. I clamp my teeth to keep from gasping my pack straps digging into my shoulder. Sweat beads along my hairline. They are methodical, searching, listening. Their breaths are soft but deliberate. Perhaps 2 or 3 men moving in tandem, scanning for any disturbance. I sense their proximity just a dozen meters away over my left shoulder. Their flashlights might cut through the gloom at any moment. I squeeze my eyes shut, stifling a scream. My body buzzes with adrenaline. Memories surge their leader's cold eyes, reflecting firelight as he barked orders, the smell of kerosene and sweat in their camp, the meager meal they'd stolen from us before dragging me away. I had tried to reason, to beg, but their voices had hardened around me like talons. Now those same voices hunt me once more. Minutes stretch into an agonizing eternity. I hear a twig snap under a heavy boot. My stomach knots. Then, surprisingly, the voices recede, drifting off toward the riverbank. Relief floods me so quickly, I nearly gasp aloud. They must have followed my earlier tracks or heard the diversion I set. They are circling, determined to flush me out. I count 8 slow breath cycles to steady my beating heart. The rain has eased further, and thin shafts of moonlight weave through the treetops, casting ghostly patterns on the ground. In this pale glow, I glimpse one of their flashlights bobbing behind a cluster of saplings. A second later, a low laugh, harsh and triumphant, drifts my way, taunting me. I clamp my jaw shut against the urge to respond, my mind racing. I need a plan to stay hidden until dawn, when the gang will likely break off the search or move upstream. My supplies are dwindling, the water pouch is half empty, and the energy bar tastes chalky on my tongue. I rub my eyes, trying to focus in the darkness. Over the past hours, I've become attuned to every nuance. A sigh of disturbed air, the faint scrape of vine threads, the irregular beat of my own heart hammering in my ears. Then a new sound, soft and deliberate, the rustle of animal movement, perhaps a peccary rummaging in the undergrowth. My eyes flick open, and I watch as a small creature scuttles past the entrance of my shelter, nose twitching. It pauses, snorts, then retreats. The gang might mistake such sounds for wildlife and not investigate further. I quietly gather a handful of loose leaves and drop them deeper inside, letting the peccary's passage mask any sign of my breath or subtle movement. As the animal fades away, the voices return, but now distant, echoing along the river's banks. I swallow hard, reminding myself that their flashlights will lose range in the swirling mist. I am invisible if I don't move. They are complacent in the false assumption that I fled toward the water. But staying here risks dehydration and collapse. Dawn is still hours away. I weigh my options, remain in this fragile cave, and pray for morning, or slip out under the cover of pre-dawn mist to circle back across denser territory. My muscles protest at the thought of movement, but my mind sparks if I can find higher ground, perhaps a tree hollow or cave shelter near a tributary. I might rest safely while they search the main river corridor. I recall the kapok tree I glimpsed earlier, its massive roots forming arches that sheltered a shallow depression. It stood hiked uphill a few hundred meters beyond the clearing. If I could reach it quietly, I might gain a better vantage, and the thicker undergrowth there would conceal my approach. But between here and there, lay open compounds of lianas and a stretch of exposed soil that would crackle underfoot. Silence rules the forest, now broken only by the gang's distant chatter and the nighttime orchestra. My pack rests within arm's reach. I ease my hand toward it, fingers brushing cold canvas. It contains my compass, but I dare not risk the metallic click. Instead, I slip my arm inside to cradle my flint and spare whistle, gripping them like lifelines. If they find me, I'll need to ignite a distraction. I wait listening until their voices wane into silence. Then, heart pounding, I draw in a deep breath, filling my lungs with humid, oxygen-rich air. I exhale slowly, steadying my trembling limbs. My boots are just outside the fronds. If I extricate them quietly, I can step onto mossy ground that muffles sound. I wiggle one foot free, then the other, flexing my toes to revive circulation. I rise silently, the skeletal frame of my shelter brushing against my shoulders. The scent of damp wood and decaying leaves fills my nostrils. I pivot on my heel and slide out into the moonlit clearing, careful to step where the soil is softest. The familiar shapes of fig roots loom like silent guardians as I slip toward the slope leading to the kapok. Every fiber of my being screams caution. I move in deliberate fluid motions, like stalking a prey far more dangerous. My boots press into moss, then leaf litter, and I exhale only when a momentary stillness demands it. Behind me, the shelter stands concealed beneath fronds, an optical illusion of forest debris. The hill is steep, but the ground here is firmer, studded with tangled roots that serve as natural footholds. I climb, each movement measured. A sudden gust of wind sifts through overhead leaves, sending a shallow cascade of droplets across my skin. I freeze, listening. No voices echo behind either they moved on or are too far to catch this faint stir. I press on, following my mental bearings east-northeast. The kapok's massive trunk soon emerges before me, pale and broad roots spreading like a spider's legs. Around its base, the forest floor is less cluttered, and small hollows in the root arches could serve as better cover than my previous shelter. I slip inside one such arch, the heavy bark pressing against my back. Here the canopy opens slightly, and a sliver of moonlight illuminates the curve of the root wall. The earth beneath feels drier. I crouch low, pressing my cheek to the bark. The rain has ceased, leaving the air thick with petrichor. In the silence, I can almost hear my own blood pulsing. It is nearly impossible to relax, but I brush my palm along the root until I find a crevice deep enough to conceal my hand. I ease the flint into a pocket in my shirt, the whistle into the other. My water pouch sits between my knees. I take 2 small sips, no more, preserving each precious drop. Behind me, the jungle stirs. I tense, expecting to hear the gang's voices drifting uphill, but they do not come. Either they never found my trail here, or they assume I fled deeper into the river. I exhale, forcing my shoulders to loosen. I must stay alert, but I must also rest. I coil myself as small as possible, hugging the root's curve. The tree's vast bulk feels protective, its ancient strength a silent guardian against my pursuers. My eyes flutter shut, the quiet pressing against my eardrums, and at last I drift into a wary half-sleep, fingers clutching the roots, heart anchored by a fragile hope that dawn will bring rescue, or at the very least a chance for escape. Dawn's pale light sifted through the canopy as I awoke, muscles stiff and joints protesting every movement. My temporary refuge at the base of the kapok tree had barely shielded me from the night's cooler mist, but I'd survived. Now I faced the river's call, a distant roar, transformed by daylight into an urgent beckoning. Water meant life hydration transport and perhaps a route out. But water also carried risks, rapids, hidden predators, and the very odds that my captors might use the river to track or ambush me. I flexed my cramped toes inside my damp boots and eased myself from the route's protective curve. The world around me pulsed with new energy, cicadas quieted, replaced by bird calls, macaws screaming overhead, toucans chattering, and the odd squawk of a grackle. Below, the pungent scent of wet earth and blooming orchids mingled with the faint tang of morning dew on leaves. I drank twice from my water pouch, then stowed it inside my pack, fastening the flap so I could grab it without fumbling if I had to run. Stepping into the undergrowth, I retraced my route downhill, careful to step on mossy patches that muffled sound. Broken ferns and fallen leaves curled under my feet without complaint. I scanned each root, each leaf, anticipating potential traps, ropes strung low across game trails, pitfalls concealed beneath branches, or even razor-sharp blades wedged in trunks. The gang had hunted animals here, and they knew these woods far better than I ever would. 10 minutes later, I reached the tributary, an unhurried dark channel slicing through the jungle floor. Its water was tinted by tannins, tea-colored and deceptively shallow in spots, but I could hear the surge of something deeper and swifter ahead. I knelt at the bank, pressing my fingers into the mud to test depth, cool, quivering earth that released a soft hiss as I withdrew my hand. A jaguar track massive paw print pressed deep beside my own tentative finger holes. My heart clenched. An apex predator used this watering hole, and I was intruder. I rose and circled, searching for a lesser-known crossing. On the far shore, the forest fell away slightly, opening onto a patch of sunlit grasses. It looked welcome, a meadow carved by seed and sun, but I recognized its danger. Open ground meant exposure. Every step I took, there would be visible to anyone downstream, and that included the riverine boat gang I feared might patrol these waters. Still, the meadow might lead to an old logging path locals whispered about. My gut urged caution, but the lure of civilization beckoned. I crouched low and crawled forward, using a fallen palm trunk as a shield. The water's edge glinted with reflections of the sky, and I saw fish dart beneath the surface, silver flashes like fleeting hope. A pair of capybaras grazed at the bank, untroubled by my presence. Their placid calm reminded me that no chase trampled the delicate balance here, but I was not a capybara. I was the hunted. A gentle breeze stirred the reeds, and I rose slightly to peer through a tangle of vines. Across the stream, I glimpsed what looked like remnants of a wooden platform sunk between rotted posts, perhaps the base of an old fishing pier. It sat half submerged, moss-covered and slick, but it offered a potential crossing point above water level. I tested a long pole-like branch from a fallen palm, probing the depth from a distance. Water lapped around the submerged platform, revealing uneven planks and gaps that could swallow a boot. Yet if I rasped carefully across, I might reach the far bank with minimal wading, avoiding the cold suction of mud around my legs. Before committing, I weighed another option, following the tributary upstream. The current there was gentler. I might find a narrow point where logs and rocks formed a natural bridge. Upstream meant heading deeper into unknown territory and perhaps away from any trails. But upstream also meant ascending, expending more energy, and risking dehydration before finding the main river. The direct route across via the platform seemed faster, though more perilous. I listened for sound. The water burbled forward, but I also detected voices, male, gruff closer. My throat tightened. My pursuers likely used canoes to travel downstream. If they hailed a passing canoe, they could ambush at the crossing, or they might wade the tributary themselves, splitting up to flank me. I tasted the hot tang of fear, then pushed it aside. Overthinking could immobilize me. I needed a decision. I steadied myself, inhaled through my nose, and made my plan. I would cross on the submerged platform, pocketing the pole for balance, then melt into the grasses on the far bank before pressing northeast along the edge of the clearing. If I stayed low, pressed against knee-high reeds, I might be indistinct from wildlife, moving through sunlit shadows. From there, I'd follow a game trail that likely led toward higher ground and ideally to human activity, perhaps a research station or local community. I unstrapped my pack and set it on the bank. Inside the top pocket lay my map and compass. I pulled them out. The compass needle quivered northward, and I aligned the map by carefully folding the edges to reveal the tributary's course. The platform lay due southeast, then a grass opening to the northeast. I snapped the map back, flush tucked it away, and slung the pack over my shoulders. Next, I retrieved my pole, a sturdy length of palm stripped clean of fronds, and gripped it like a staff. It felt solid in my hands, ready to brace my steps. I approached the platform edge, testing each plank with the pole before stepping. The wood groaned but held. My booted foot landed on a mossy board, water swirling around my calves. The pole wobbled, and I steadied it against a post, listening to the clack of my pulse in my ears. Halfway across the board, cracked underfoot. I froze, heart in my throat, convinced it would give way. But with slow, careful motion, I shifted weight and moved to the next plank. Below me, darting fish fled the disturbance. Ahead, I saw the moss-covered post, my lifeline. One more step, and I would reach the grass. Then a shout echoed from downstream. Allah, no se escape. Panic surged through me. I dove low, vaulting off the platform and landing in waist-deep water with a bone-jarring thud. My pack yanked me back, but I kicked and surfaced in a burst, splashing toward the reeds. Water streamed from my soaked clothes, weighing me down like a second skin. Leaves slapped my arms as I thrashed forward, leaving a pale wake in the dark water. At the bank, I scrambled onto grassy mud, heart hammering. A bullet of adrenaline sent me sprinting along the shore, feet churning through squelch and reeds snapping at my legs. My pole floated behind me, snagged on a broken post. I tore my focus from it, knowing I could not stop. Ahead, the grass opened into a narrow strip hugging the hillside. I plunged into it, staggering over tufts of coarse grass and thorny brush. Behind me, oars slapped water, and the river's roar trembled with human fury. I didn't look back. Instead, I kept my gaze forward, tracking the faint trail marked by flattened grass. My lungs burned from exertion. I sucked air through my teeth, willing my legs not to collapse. The tributary curved away, and I sensed more solid ground ahead, a cluster of palms marking the end of the meadow. I reached it on numb legs, tumbling onto dry grass beneath their fronds. For a moment, I lay there, chest heaving, letting the sun warm my soaked clothes. The sounds of pursuit receded. I dared a glance toward the water. My captors' faces veiled by distance, and spray motored upstream in a narrow pirogue. Bullets flashed sun glinting off metal barrels, but none came close. I realized they wouldn't risk a hasty waiting pursuit in these reeds. They would circle downstream to intercept me. With trembling fingers, I unzipped my pack and retrieved a small cloth. I dabbed my eyes of water and combed a handful of grass over my wet shirt to dampen the sheen. My clothes were no camouflage here. I needed soil. I brushed mud onto my arms and legs, blotting the wet fabric and muting its reflectiveness. It was a crude measure, but better than nothing. Securing the map again, I oriented myself east, was toward denser forest and higher terrain. My path lay through a narrow gap between two fan palms leading uphill. My ears caught distant bird calls I'd passed earlier, a sign of a side stream or small clearing. If I could find fresh water, I'd replenish my pouch. If not, I'd push on to the next ridge and hope for a vantage of the river's bend, searching for passing boats or smoke plumes from distant camps. The grass whispered as I rose and sidestepped behind the palms. My legs wobbled like new saplings, but resolve lent them strength. Branches scraped my shoulders, but I welcomed the sting it reminded me I was alive. Each step was a victory against the water's weight and the forest's perils. As I slipped back into the thick green wall of the Amazon, the meadow and the river faded from view. My soaked clothes clung to me, and my feet squelched with every stride. Yet the taste of triumph was sweet, a heady rush beneath the threat of gunfire and the jungle's silent predators. I guided myself with the map's faded lines, trusting instincts honed by hours of flight. Behind me, the river wound through the forest like a silver ribbon, both friend and foe. Ahead lay the unknown tributary's ridges, and I prayed sanctuary. With a final glance eastward, I plunged back under the canopy's emerald vault, determined to follow the faint trail and seize each moment before darkness fell again. By late afternoon, the adrenaline that had powered my flight all morning and midday waned, replaced by a gnawing emptiness in my stomach and a cotton-mouthed thirst that burned every swallow of air. My water pouch was nearly empty, and the last energy bar, once a dry comfort, now sat untouched in my pack because my stomach rebelled at the idea of food. The jungle around me pulsed with life. Dragonflies darted over trickling rivulets, monkeys chattered in the canopy, and orchids bloomed in riotous clusters. Yet each vibrant detail felt distorted, as if viewed through a haze of dehydration and exhaustion. My vision wavered. Leaves seemed to ripple like mirages, and roots writhed underfoot as though the earth itself were alive. I blinked, eyes stinging from sweat and grit. Every breath felt thick, the humid air lodging in my chest like a lead weight. My throat constricted with a fierce dryness, and my temples throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I pressed a hand to my forehead, hoping for relief, but found only feverish heat. I staggered forward along the narrow animal trail, the undergrowth slapping against my legs and arms. Roots jutted from the soil, waiting to trip me, but I barely saw them. The forest floor shifted like undulating waves, and I fought the urge to collapse. Yet I pressed on, driven by a mixture of terror and determination. A wrong turn might lead me back to my pursuers or into the maw of a jaguar's den. Memories of children's survival guides flickered through my mind. Drink only clear water, avoid berries unless you can identify them, rest when possible. But wisdom was useless when my body rebelled. I pressed my lips to a wet leaf, licking away condensation, but the moisture tasted faintly of decay. Desperate, I sought a stream, any sign of water. After what felt like hours, but might have been minutes, I stumbled upon a narrow creek cutting through the jungle floor. Its banks were steep and slick with moss. Leaning over, I cupped water in my hands and brought it to my lips. The liquid was lukewarm, tinged with earth, but it was life. I drank greedily, swallowing until my lungs protested, then paused to breathe. The creek's burble soothed my frayed nerves. I dipped a bandana in the flow and wiped sweat from my face. When I raised my head, I nearly missed the jaguarundi lying on a rock upstream, a sleek cat with amber eyes surveying me. It held my gaze for a heartbeat, then padded silently into the underbrush. My heart fluttered both at the beauty of the creature and the reminder that I shared this realm with apex predators. Bolstered by the brief respite, I filled my pouch, careful to filter debris through cloth. I drank again, then rolled a portion of damp bandana around my wrist, cooling veins with the creek's embrace. My vision cleared slightly, the hallucinations receding to the edges of perception. Yet even now I caught brief flashes, twisted faces of pursuers morphing into tree trunks, branches dripping with blood shadows that seemed to flicker independently of light. I shook my head, fighting the illusions. I had to conserve energy and conserve water. The river might lie just beyond the next ridge, but would it offer safety or swift currents that could sweep me away? My map indicated a bend where a waterway widened into a lagoon. Locals sometimes fished, and on rare occasions, emergency flights skimmed the banks. That was my goal. I refilled my pouch again, securing it inside my pack. The water weighed heavy, but each step, without the dread of imminent dehydration, felt lighter. I rewrapped my headscarf, mopping fresh sweat, and pressed onward. Each footfall on the soft earth sounded muffled and distant, as though I were wading through honey. By mid-afternoon's end, the hallucinations returned. I paused beneath a heliconia's blossoms, brilliant red bracts drooping like lanterns, to rest against its sturdy stem. The petals pulsed, glowing from within petals, shifting to form faces, imploring rescue. A tap on the shoulder made me whirl empty air. The lion's roar of my panic echoed in my ears. I pressed a trembling finger to my lips, willing calm. I closed my eyes and inhaled the jungle's scent, damp wood, sweet orchid, a hint of predator musk. Slowly, I recited a mantra, steady steps, steady, breath forward over and over, until my heart stilled. When I opened my eyes, the forest held stillness, no tremor in the air. Emboldened, I resumed my march, leaning on a carved walking stick I'd fashioned from a fallen branch, its bark sanded smooth. It was my anchor, a reminder that I could still shape my fate. Every time doubt clawed at me, I gripped the stick, feeling its solidity beneath my palm. I climbed another slope, the canopy thinning to admit slanting beams of sunlight. The undergrowth here was lighter ferns, arching to form a natural tunnel. Through the foliage, I spotted movement, a glint of metal in the distance, a discarded tin can half buried in leaf litter, a sign of previous human presence. Hope flared. I hurried toward it. As I emerged into a small clearing, I saw more relics, faint tire tracks pressed into clay remnants of a wildlife camera trap wired to a tree. The tracks led east toward my goal. My pulse accelerated not with fear, but with cautious optimism. The hallucinations flickered again. The camera lens warped into an eye that blinked at me. I grabbed my headscarf and pressed it to my brow, forcing the fever away. "Not real," I whispered. Then I focused on the tracks fresh, perhaps 24 hours old. My pursuers had passed this way too, but were now ahead of me. The realization was a blow. I had to move faster. I slung my pack higher and gripped my walking stick firmly. The lagoon lay beyond this ridge, a few hours' scramble by the trail. If I could reach it before sunset, I might flag down any passing boat, or failing that refill water, and catch a signal flare, a relic stored in the ranger's supply cache, rumored to be on an overhanging ledge. I set off with renewed purpose, footsteps echoing through the tunnel of ferns. Each step was a battle against hunger, dehydration, and the persistent shadows in my mind. Yet I held onto the signs, glint of metal broken trap wires, flowing water. The Amazon was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but now I felt less like its prey and more like its participant, threading my own narrative through its vast green tapestry. The sun hovered low, casting long stripes of light through the canopy when I stumbled into the clearing, a jagged triangular patch of broken branches and crushed ferns that screamed human. My heart stuttered between hope and terror. I crouched behind a slender palm, pressing my back palm slicked against its trunk as I surveyed the scene. At first glance, it appeared abandoned, a small lean-to built of sapling poles and fronds, a charred patch of earth where a campfire had been, and scattered tins of food and half-empty water canteens. I swallowed and crept forward on cautious toes, every sense alert. The forest seemed to hold its breath around me. Birdsong hushes insects, pausing mid-thrum. I touched the blackened stones of the hearth. The fire was cold, the embers gone hours ago. I risked a glance downhill and saw no movement, no sign of life. The grasses swayed gently where the light spilled in, and I forced my shaking limbs to move. Droplets of sweat beaded along my forehead, like tiny candles flickering with each throb of my pulse. My pack lay heavy on my shoulders, but I set it down silently, unbuckling the flap and slipping inside. My trembling fingers pulled out a half-crushed tin of beans and a packet of dried meat. I hesitated. Trust was a rare currency here, but hunger gnawed at me. I ripped open the tin with a flint knife and sniffed faintly metallic, but otherwise edible. I spooned a bite that tasted bland but rich like hope itself. Beside the meal stood a single plastic jug, its label peeled away. I lifted it and tilted. Water sloshed inside. I poured it into my canteen, then sipped, grimacing at the hard steel taste. Yet each swallow soothed the fire in my throat. As I drank, I examined the lean-to more closely. The sapling poles were roughly sharpened, not carved with survivalist precision. Palm fronds woven overhead were weathered but whole, suggesting this camp had shelter for only one night. I rose and studied the perimeter footprints pressed deep in the softened earth, too small for my size and oddly shaped, as if the wearers walked in sandals made of stitched together tire strips. I knelt to trace the prints, the coarse grooves of tire tread imprinting the mud. Beside them, deeper impressions betrayed bare toes curling in the earth, walking in that same rendezvous. Who had camped here? My pursuers, or perhaps someone else caught in the same net. A loose tin can clattered underfoot as I rose, and my breath caught at the sudden sound in the hushed clearing. I froze, only to realize the branch was long dead and the wind had nudged it. I exhaled slowly and forced my gaze past the lean-to to a small pack leaning against a root wall, lighter than mine, pulsing with possibility. Inside, I glimpsed a first aid kit, a half-wrapped roll of gauze, and a handful of antiseptic wipes. Relief washed over me, sharp and immediate. If only I could tape the raw blister forming on my ankle. I crossed the clearing in a few cautious strides, scanning for danger. Each movement felt amplified. Leaves crackled behind me, and I spun flashlight bouncing off dark trunks. Nothing. I reached the pack and unzipped it, fingers flicking out the gauze wipes and a small spray bottle labeled Desinfecto. The label's language was Portuguese. I realized surely left by locals or missionaries. But mixed with the contents, I found a crumpled scrap of paper. My chest tightened when I unfolded it. The paper bore a hastily scrawled message. Eles passaram aqui ontem. Não confiem. Grupo Jaguar. They were here yesterday. Don't trust them. Jaguar Group. The ink was smudged with rain, but the warning was clear. The Jaguar Group, my kidnappers, had camped here too. I'd hoped this was an innocent outpost, a forgotten missionary or relief workers' site, but their signature was everywhere. Broken shells of bullets scattered at the fire's edge, a widened boot track gouged into the soft mud. The scrap of paper weighed heavy in my hand, its warning echoing in my mind. My throat tightened. Every scrap of hope now carried a sting of dread. The supplies that had given me a reprieve were part of the same horror. I rifled through the lean-to's debris. A matchbox with half its contents used a stained rag that reeked faintly of diesel, perhaps their motorboat fuel rag, and a small empty canister that once held mosquito repellent. My stomach lurched. The gang had been here, and I had been walking into their web. Panic clawed at my chest. I sank to one knee and pressed my palm over my heart, willing it to slow. Memories of the kidnapping hung at the edge of my mind, the way sunlight shone off masked faces. Machetes raised high shouts in broken Guarani demanding valuables. The relief in that camp felt like a cruel trick now. I looked up at the canopy, where shafts of light flickered like silver arrows aimed at me. The jungle above seemed to conspire, sending mocking rays through the leaves. I had to choose abandon these supplies and risk walking on empty, or use them and pay the price of exposure. My blistered ankle screamed for the gauze. Blood seeped through the fabric of my sock when I tested the wound. Without care, infection in this heat could slow me to a crawl. I closed my eyes and weighed pain against peril. The jungle's teeming life demanded care. Neglecting injury was an open invitation to misery. Slowly I set about cleaning the wound with a wipe the antiseptic stinging fresh skin. I tore a strip of gauze and wrapped it firmly, then secured it with a piece of medical tape. My boot slipped back on with a wet squelch, but the pressure was bearable. Next, I poured the remaining water into my bottle, then drank until the last drop. I stowed the empty jug in my pack, knowing a spare container could help later. The first aid kit offered an unexpected sanctuary, a reminder that somewhere someone cared enough to bring help, if only briefly. Yet the Jaguar group's warning lingered. I slid the scrap of paper into my shirt pocket, letting its corners brush against my chest like a burden. Don't trust them. Even the wind through the leaves seemed to echo those words. I surveyed my surroundings again. The lean-to's frame remained sturdy but inconspicuous, perfect for quick assembly. If I circled back later, I could use it to stow equipment or hide from midday storms. But for now, I needed to move on. I should not linger in a place the gang knew intimately. Using their resources meant risking their traps or ambushes rigged after they left. I grabbed my pack and slung it on shoulders, settling under the renewed weight. The forest leaned in close vines, brushing my arms, orchids nodding as if in silent counsel. I took a deep breath of humid air, tasting the promise of both salvation and danger. Each step forward would mean leaving life-giving supplies behind, but gaining a chance to outrun those who sought me. I turned away from the lean-to and set eastward once more, letting the jungle's green tides close in behind me. Every footfall was measured on moss rather than dry leaves on soft earth to muffle sound. I paused at the edge of the clearing and traced my finger in the mud smearing the lean-to's path in a swirling spiral, erasing evidence, confusing any who followed. As I disappeared into the emerald gloom, I glanced back once. The camp lay silent, empty, but for the ghosts of human presence. The supplies I carried would buoy me through one more day, but the scrap of paper would haunt me longer. The Jaguar group had been this close. They might circle back at any moment. I pressed on, guided by the fading afternoon light filtering through layered leaves. My pack felt lighter and heavier all at once, lighter for the discarded water jug and ration tins, heavier for the knowledge of how close danger had come. Each step carried the promise of survival and the warning that safety in the Amazon was always fleeting, always brittle as a dried frond. I'd gone no more than 100 meters when the unmistakable snap of a hidden tripwire jolted me stiff. My gaze snapped to a thin, almost invisible cord stretched between two young palms at ankle height. My heart lurched. It was a trap. I'd seen this before in survival manuals and specialized training, a crude but effective snare meant to catch a foot unbalanced, a runner, or trigger a hidden alarm of shells or tin cans. My breath caught as I realized it lay directly on my intended path, the soft earth around it, undisturbed except for the single taut line. Panic rose hot in my chest, but adrenaline sharpened my mind. I froze, eyes scanning for more. The Jaguar group hadn't simply abandoned that lean-to. They'd rigged the transitional trails to flush out anyone returning. I cursed under my breath, recalling snippets of guerrilla tactics I'd once read use the victim's momentum against them. They'd counted on me barreling through without caution. I swallowed hard and crouched, prying a stick from my walking staff to lift the wire without touching it. Below the cord, the ground was caltrip-free, but my pack would scoop it up on a full-speed dash. If I stepped carelessly, I'd trigger the tripwire and announce my presence with whatever alarm they'd rigged, empty shells rattling in a can, or worse, an explosive device. I probed around the first trap and found a second lower to the ground. My foot would have tripped it effortlessly. The entire corridor was laced with thin wires, 6 in total, precise and methodically placed. My pulse hammered, but leaving untreated meant walking blind through an unseen minefield. I exhaled, forcing calm. I scanned the area for patterns. Each wire ran parallel, spaced to match step lengths. They'd mapped the typical stride of someone walking at a comfortable pace. If I shortened my steps, I could pass between them, but there was no guarantee my exhaustion wouldn't betray me with a misstep. I thought back to my improvised diversion tactics, blind alleys retracing prints. This time, I needed a false route. I withdrew my map and compass risky, but I could orient myself 50 meters north, bypass the snare corridor entirely, and circle back to the main trail. The risk was veering into unknown terrain, but with compass in hand, I could keep heading east toward the river bend. I set the compass to east-northeast, aligning my map. A cluster of roots 30 meters north offered cover. I'd use them as waypoints, hopping covertly from one to the next, staying low. Then I'd emerge beyond the last wire and rejoin the beaten path. Each move would need to be precise, guided by the compass's steady needle. The sun dipped lower, turning the jungle's green to smoky gold. I noted landmarks, the twisted root of a burzera tree, shaped like a woman's bent arm, a knobby termite mound crowned with fungus. I murmured them to myself, committing the sequence to memory in case I had to retrace arm root fungus mound mossy boulder, then the open clearing beyond the final wire. I slipped into a crouch compass, clutched in one hand, machete in the other. The undergrowth was thick, but I pressed forward, hugging the forest floor. My shoulders brushed damp leaves, my boots pressed on soft earth. I counted each root, each rock echoing the landmarks in my mind. 10 meters north of the trap corridor, I paused behind a buttress root. The canopy above let in slashes of dying light. I exhaled the magnitude of the trap corridor's threat crashing over me. A single mistake could cascade into chaos. My fingers brushed the damp bark as I steadied my breathing in 4 counts out 4. I slid from cover, following the compass, bearing moving foot by foot, knee first, then hand. Each meter traversed felt like a sprint. I watched for the fungus-topped mound there, half buried beneath creeping vines. I noted the shape, then pivoted slightly eastward, clipping a small vial of water from my belt and taking a tentative sip. It cooled my throat and steeled my nerves. My next waypoint lay 20 paces ahead, a mossy boulder wedged between 2 palms. When I reached it, I pressed my back against it, heart drumming. A swirl of insects clustered around its cool surface, oblivious to the human chess 5 meters away. I whispered, "Step 3, root arch." But instead of retracing, I kept the compass bearing steady 080 degrees perfect for cutting a diagonal back to the main trail. With the boulder behind me, I slid off the moss and ducked beneath a tangle of vines. There, the ground rose slightly, a natural incline formed by embedded roots. I pressed face first to the soil, breathing the jungle's musk. A single silver leaf drifted onto my hand, evidence of heavy foliage above. I was nearly beyond the wires. Just then I heard a soft metallic click, like a jaw of a trap closing. My blood ran cold. Somewhere within those wire-laced meters, something had shifted. Had I triggered a secondary alarm, or was it the jungle's myriad creaks? I froze, listening. Nothing followed, only the distant lament of a howler monkey. I couldn't wait to find out. I rose, staying as low as possible, and slithered through a gap where the ground eddied in a natural concave. I pressed my palm to the earth, no wires visible yet. I inched forward, barely lifting my foot, using the removal of weight to test for tripwires. My toes brushed leaves. The earth beneath felt undisturbed until I felt a slight resistance. A thin wire. I halted immediately. Heart racing, I traced the wire's path with my machete tip, bending it into a loop. I felt relief when the steel yielded. Carefully, I bound the wire to a branch, bending it up and out of the way. Then, inch by inch, I unspooled the rest of the wires, wrapping them around my machete's handle so they wouldn't snag. In the final 10 meters, I took my time, removing each hidden strand. My loneliness in that moment was absolute. The forest held no justice, no forgiveness for trespassers. Only my own will could carry me forward. At last, I stood beyond the last snare. I exhaled so forcefully my lungs burned. I rose to my feet, swaying for a heartbeat before I centered. The sun had slipped behind the canopy, and dusk's violet gloom enveloped the forest. I used my last vial of water to rinse the sweat from my face, tasting the tang of metal. I consulted my compass again, 080 degrees. I adjusted my pack and flicked my machete back into its sheath. Ahead lay the main trail I'd abandoned, a faint line through flattened grass. I spotted it, a narrow gap edged with trampled ferns. I re-entered the path as I'd planned, feet light, senses sharp. Every rustle beyond the wire corridor past was a potential ambush, but the jaguar group's trap lay behind me now. I'd reclaimed agency in this deadly dance. My boots pressed onto the familiar trail, its soft earth now free of snares, but thick with previous footprints, my own and theirs. I willed my steps silent, careful not to compress prints deeper than the existing impressions. I followed the path toward the river's arc, the world growing darker by the heartbeat. Above me, glowing fungal clusters pulsed in the gloom, little beacons guiding me onward. Each step carried me past the corridor that nearly ensnared my fate, deeper into the Amazon's embrace. Fear still churned, but so did resolve. Survival depended on both. I paused at the edge of a narrow clearing where sunlight speared down through the canopy, casting golden shafts onto a carpet of ferns. My chest heaved, every muscle screaming from the morning's evasion of tripwires. Ahead, I spotted movement, a lone figure stepping lightly over roots, crouched beside the edge of a trickling stream. He wore simple cotton pants and a woven sash. No backpack, no obvious tools, just a slender wooden staff carved with intricate patterns. His skin was dark hair pulled back from a weathered face that regarded me with cautious curiosity. My heart leapt human contact after days of solitary flight, but also a new danger. This could be another member of the jaguar group, another trap waiting to spring. I raised a hand instinctively, ready to shout a warning or draw my machete, but before I could speak, he straightened, tossing aside a handful of berries and lifting his palm in a peaceful gesture. His voice came soft, in a language I barely recognized, Ticuna, perhaps then switched to halting Spanish amigo, perdido. I croaked voice, raspy from dehydration. I stepped forward cautiously, weight shifting onto my walking stick. Yes, lost. My accent tangled Spanish into English, but he nodded, lips pursed in understanding. He pointed upstream, then to my pack, then back to downstream, as though offering guidance or assistance. My gut tightened in distrust. Was he drawing me into an ambush or truly offering help? I scanned his expression, calm eyes, a faint crease of concern at his brow. He spoke again, softer, slower, campesino. Poco ayuda, pero yo ayudar. He was a local campesino, a farmer or bush dweller, offering what little help he could. Relief rippled through me, but so did caution. I remembered the scrawled warning, "Don't trust them." My pursuers had camped nearby. Perhaps he was one of their scouts in disguise. Yet famine and thirst gnawed at me. If he truly had local knowledge, he could guide me to water sources, safe trails, perhaps even to a mission station or ranger post. I weighed the risks alone. I was prey again to both jungle and gang. With him, I had at least a chance at shelter and direction. I lowered my machete, signaling tentative truce. He relaxed, offering a small carved flask of resin, probably lick treat or water container. I took it with trembling fingers and tilted the stopper. Sweet, resinous water coated my tongue. It soothed my parched throat. I offered a silent thanks, and he gestured for me to follow. His staff tapped a steady rhythm on the mossy ground. As I walked behind him, I kept my senses alert. His gait was sure barefoot on forest floor each step, avoiding broken twigs and exposed roots. He paused at a fallen log and pointed to a series of scratch marks on its bark. Jaguarundi tracks, he indicated, warning me of the big cat's nearby lair. I glanced nervously, picturing the panther's telescoping shadow. He then tapped downstream, murmuring a word I didn't know. Beneath the log ran a tiny rivulet, clear as glass, pooling in shaded depressions. He motioned for me to fill my pouch, so I knelt and scooped water filtering through a bandana. His eyes followed my every move, but he didn't try to steal or vanish with my supplies. After I refilled the pouch, he pointed east with an open hand, then tapped his heart and nodded, indicating an emotional bond, a pact of trust. Fear flickered. Was I naive to accept? Yet his gestures were consistent, his manner gentle. I drank again from the pouch, wintergreen tang mixing with earth. He beckoned me to follow a narrow deer path that diverged from the main trail. I glanced back toward the river's sparkle, through the trees my intended destination, but his path cut slightly southward, threading between thick palms. I opened my mouth to protest, but he shook his head with a half smile and tapped the map pocket on my pack. I realized then he wanted me to follow his route instead of mine, why I asked in broken Spanish. He pointed ahead and spoke a placating phrase, then pointed back Peligro, on main trail the Jaguar group. He crossed his arms and snapped his fingers, miming gunshots and shouting. My blood ran cold at the word danger. He was warning me that the main river corridor was swarming with my captors. His path no longer skirted their ambush points. I exhaled adrenaline, mixing with gratitude. Together we slipped into the undergrowth, stepping where he had trodden before. The thick ferns matted the ground, flattening an otherwise visible trail. Branches arched overhead like tunnels, blocking glimpses of the sky, and the moist air smelled of wild ginger and sandalwood scents I'd only encountered here in secret groves. As we walked, I tried to engage him gestures for name. He tapped his chest and whispered, Yayuri. A simple name, but it meant everything now. I tapped mine and said Michael. He smiled and his eyes flicked to the blade at my hip. I nodded, sheathing my machete inside him. I felt a fragile trust blooming. Ayari led me deeper into a glade, where huge kakepok trees formed arches, their buttresses forming natural benches. He motioned me to rest and offered fruit from a hidden pouch. Small green-skinned berries that burst with tart sweetness. I bit into one and closed my eyes at the refreshing tang. He pointed to the cluster's edible patterns, then tapped my shoulder and pointed uphill, Casa Viega Old House. Roused by hope, I followed him uphill each step, easing the tension knotted in my shoulders. He moved without haste, but with certainty I envied. As we crested the hill, I saw what he meant, a moss-covered stone ruin, perhaps a century old, tucked under vines and ferns. Its roof had collapsed, but the walls stood firm, offering shelter. I ran a hand along the cool stone. It felt like stepping out of time into a place where human toil once met nature's will. Ayari gestured me inside and set down a small bundle of palm fronds. He'd cleared a corner for us to rest. Then, to my surprise, he removed a carved whistle from a leather thong around his neck. He blew 3 soft notes, an echoing trill that faded into the forest. I turned to him uncertain. He smiled a warning signal, perhaps alerting any friendly eyes nearby that I was under his protection. Exhausted, I sank onto the stone floor. Ayari knelt beside me and pulled a piece of dried fish from his pouch, offering it. I ate, gratefully, voice failing me for words. My guide had saved me from traps, ambush routes, and thirst. Yet beneath relief-laced anxiety, what did he want in return? He pressed his palm to his chest and mirrored the gesture to me solidarity. Then he tapped the direction of the river, lifting his staff toward the horizon. Rio, pronto, river soon. We would reach the water's edge before night. He would not betray me. I felt that in the steady calm of his presence. I closed my eyes, listening to his staff's soft tap against the stone floor. The whispered sigh of wind through ancient walls and the rhythmic pulse of a heart brave enough to guide a stranger through the Amazon's teeth. For the first time since the kidnapping, I believed someone in this jungle might truly be on my side. We moved quietly from the crumbling stone shelter, Iyari's barefoot steps silent against worn flagstones. The jungle had reclaimed much of the old structure vines, draped like curtains, moss coated every surface, but it offered a brief respite, a moment's shelter from the relentless hunt. I slung my pack over my shoulder and tested my ankle. The gauze held pain dulled by gratitude and adrenaline. Ayari pointed uphill toward a handful of towering standing stones half swallowed by ferns and orchids. Lugar Sagrado, he whispered. Sacred place. My stomach twisted, crossing holy ground without respect risked angering local spirits, or worse, violating deep traditions. Yet I needed guidance, and he needed safe passage. We strode forward, the canopy thinning so that shafts of sun illuminated motes of dust like drifting stars. As we neared the stones, I noticed carvings, old worn figures etched into granite faces, twisting vines serpents with open jaws, human figures in ritual poses. A palpable hush fell. No insects droned here, only the soft susurrus of leaves and the distant call of an eagle. The air felt charged electric. I paused, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out ambient noise. Ayari knelt and pressed his palm against a serpent's carved head. Then he turned to me, eyes grave, and tapped his chest twice, then traced a circle in the air, a sign of respect. I bowed my head, mirroring him, even though I didn't fully understand the ritual. The jungle seemed to lean closer, as if watching. He spoke quietly. Takuna syllables I couldn't parse, yet felt solemn and beckoned me to step forward. With each footfall on the stone plinths, I felt older echoes stir beneath my boots, ancestors gathering in ceremony offerings laid at carved altars. A subtle vibration hummed through the ground. I swallowed hard, torn between wonder and apprehension. I placed my fingers on the serpent's head, feeling the rough grooves of millennia-old craftsmanship. My own blood pulsed through my veins, a living link across generations. I recalled maps noting this as a ceremonial site where local tribes once sought guidance from the spirits of the forest. To violate it was to invite their disfavor. To honor it could earn their protection. I stepped back and found a shallow bowl carved into the rock long since choked with detritus. With careful hands, I scooped out mud and leaves, revealing faint traces of water pooled in the center. Iyari produced a small pouch of ground coffee ritual offering, he explained in broken Spanish, and sprinkled a few grains into the water. The bitter scent rose, mingling with the earthy scent of damp stone. He took a pinch of soil from my palm and added it to the bowl, then tapped his heart, then tapped the bowl, inviting me to do the same. I pressed my fingertips against the bowl's edge, then brought them to my chest. A sudden warmth bloomed in my chest, as if the jungle acknowledged my presence and granted me passage. The hush deepened. A pair of macaws wheeled overhead, shrieking like jubilant voices. Leaves rustled as a soft breeze drifted through the clearing. I sensed acceptance. The jungle, long indifferent, had shifted. Iyari smiled a slow, genuine curve and whispered, "Protection, protection." We left the stones with careful steps, retracing our path down the hill. The forest seemed transformed, shadows less menacing, the undergrowth more forgiving. Every fern's frond brushed less like a warning and more like a welcoming gesture. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the residual warmth of the offering. Still, the jaguar group's threat lurked. Even sacred protection couldn't stop bullets. I watched the ground following deer trails that wound around sacred clearings, skirting any direct line to the riverbank. Iyari led, tapping his staff to indicate safe footing, guiding me over unstable ground. At one point, we paused beside an old stone marker, half buried in mud, another ritual site less elaborate than the standing stones. Iyari knelt again, broke off a small branch of wild ginger, and placed it at the marker's base. He then slipped his hand into his sash and retrieved a tiny pouch of aniseed, scattering a few seeds around the marker. The sweet scent rose sharply before mingling with tropical musk. He gestured for me to press anise between my palms and inhale. The licorice aroma felt clarifying, sharpening my mind. "Clarity," he explained, pointing to my eyes. I drew in a deep breath, feeling tension unwind from my shoulders. It was as though each ritual cleared a layer of fear. Yet beneath gratitude, uncertainty simmered. Could I rely on this protection, or was I merely playing roles in someone else's ancient customs? We pressed on, descending toward a broad ridge overlooking a waist-high cliff. Beyond lay the river's braided channels, shining like silver threads in the afternoon light. I caught my breath. Freedom lay beyond, but so did open exposure. The ridge was sacred too, this spot, known as a lookout, where tribal scouts once watched for migrating herds. Tradition held that those who honored the site gained safe passage through the riverside canopies. Iyari stepped onto the ridge and gestured me beside him. He pressed his palm to the earth, then tapped his lips and heart a prayer. I placed my palm on the rock, closed my eyes, and whispered a silent thanks to the spirits of this place for guiding me this far. A warm breeze stirred the canopy, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We lingered only a moment, enough to draw strength not enough to attract unwanted eyes. I peered down at the river, its currents churning around fallen logs. Downward lay my ultimate trial, weaving through tangled waterways and avoiding the jaguar group's patrols on the banks. I swallowed hard and took one last deliberate breath of sacred air. Ayari tapped my shoulder, then pointed downstream. His face wore a knowing expression. The spirits had shown him a safer route along the river's edge through a tangle of overhanging vines that masked any canoes from view. I nodded, steeling myself for what came next. As we turned to descend, I reflected on the power of belief in the Amazon, the way the forest itself seemed to acknowledge respect and ritual. I carried that reverence forward, each step an act of gratitude and humility. Though danger still prowled, I felt more anchored, more connected to something greater than my own desperate will. Together we slipped away from the sacred ground, moving toward the river that would test our resolve and seal the fate of this harrowing journey. The canopy light had softened into dusk by the time we reached the river's edge, a tangled curtain of vines and pandan leaves hanging over the braided channels. Iyari moved with ease, ducking beneath the greenery and pushing aside brush as I followed. My heart drummed with cautious optimism. The sacred rituals had seemed to seal our alliance. Now rescue felt within reach. He paused at a narrow channel between two mossy logs, water swirling in lazy eddies. "A Kui," he whispered, pointing to a half-submerged root trove that formed a makeshift footbridge. I tested the depth with my cane, waist-high, here thigh-high beyond the roots. It was passable. I nodded, and he led the way, stepping carefully across slick wood. I followed, boots slipping once, but catching on a protruding root. Halfway across, I froze. A shadow moved overhead, a flash of steel. Before I could react, Ayari spun toward me, his expression hardening. He raised his staff, tapping it sharply against my shin. The pain flared, and I stumbled on the root arms, flailing. Before I could steady myself, he struck again, a solid crack that drove me to my knees. "Kay," I gasped, but he didn't answer. His eyes were cold, distant, no flicker of the kindness I'd come to trust. I stumbled backward, bracing myself against the log's slick surface. Rain began to spit from the canopy, blurring the edges of the forest around us. He stepped closer, voice low, and clipped, "No eres amigo. You are not a friend." Betrayal bit deeper than any blade. The memories of his gentle guidance, sharing water, pointing out trails, felt like cruel illusions. My chest tightened as realization dawned. Iyari had been leading me straight into the jaguar group's ambush points, not away from them. Every ritual had bound me closer to his motives. Desperate, I reached inside my pack for the whistle. My fingers closed around the cold metal tube, just as he lashed out with the staff handle. The blow knocked the whistle into the mud. Pain surged in my side as I fell backward into the knee-deep water, the current tugging at my soaked legs. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw him raise his free hand, fingers curved like a claw. Behind him, through the vine curtains, I caught the glint of steel machete blades, half hidden by hoisted packs, and the dark silhouettes of at least two men stepping into view. My stomach lurched. They had been waiting downstream, ready for our arrival. Rain sluiced down in sheets now washing mud into my eyes. I blinked, sight shimmering. Yells echoed from deeper in the forest, shouts in broken Spanish that grew louder. The jaguar group had converged. I realized they'd communicated under the guise of that whistle. From the sacred site, 3 notes that signaled my position. I seized a fallen branch from the root tangle, hefting it like a club. My legs burned, but survival surged my adrenaline. Ayari advanced, eyes blank, as though the kindness I'd known never existed. In his hand, he held a coiled length of vine, the kind used for traps. He hissed Cory, then snapped the vine at my feet, attempting to entangle me. I twisted away, swinging the branch back. It connected with his forearm in a loud crack that silenced the patter of rain for a heartbeat. He staggered, but didn't drop the vine. Instead, anger flared in his dark eyes, and he lunged. I spun, thrusting the branch toward his chest. The tip struck bark instead of flesh splintering. Rain pounded around us, floodlighting a stage of betrayal. My pack snagged on the submerged root. I grabbed it to free myself. Behind me, the newcomers closed in, machetes raised. I yanked the pack free and dumped its contents into the knee-deep water pouch, compass, flint, anything to lighten my load. He advanced through the shallow channel, the water swirling red at his boots, blood from his injured arm. He paused, glancing at the crimson streak, then back at me, lips curling in a grin that offered no warmth. A knife slid from his sash, curved, narrow, wicked. He flicked it open, steel glinting. The current tugged at me. One misstep could send me barreling into the deeper river. I weighed the blade in his hand and my broken branch. The branch's weight balanced with the pack's shifting, and I braced myself. He whispered, "El río es tu tumba. The river is your grave." He lunged, slipping on wet wood, but momentum carried his blade toward my thigh. I raised the branch into a block. It shattered under the knife's force. Wood slivers floated away in muddy currents. Pain flared in my shoulder as the blade grazed my sleeve, but failed to penetrate, thankfully deflected by a camera tripod leg strapped inside. Using the momentary advantage, I kicked at his knee, driving him off balance. He splashed back, wiping rain from his brow. Behind him, the 2 men paused, uncertain whether to flank me or pursue mercy. I seized the chance and clutched my bleeding shoulder. Gritting my teeth, I kicked water into their faces, forcing them backward. I forced a breath, desperate for solutions. My pack was gone, my supplies scattered in the swirling water. The compass I'd dropped was lost to the mud. Yet I still had the whistle and flint in my shirt pocket. I could spark a flash and perhaps cause enough chaos to slip away. But the moment of distraction would be fleeting. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the shallow throb of life. Then I saw it, an overhanging vine, thick enough to climb. If I could scramble up and across the channel, I might evade them. But the current churned and the banks were smooth logs. I'd need to time it perfectly. He raised his knife again, advancing deliberately. His men fanned out, blocking any footpath through the vines. The rain turned fiercer, turning the riverbank into treacherous mud. I slipped on the root water rushing over my boots. Panic flared, but I forced focus, slow, breath, clear mind. I stomped my foot, sending ripples across the channel. He frowned, perhaps expecting surrender. Instead, I unbuckled the whistle from my pocket and blew a single harsh blast. The sound cracked through the rain like a pistol shot. The men flinched, exchanged confused glances, and for a fraction of a second dropped their guard. Seizing that instant, I grabbed the vine hanging just above the water, yanking myself up with all my strength. My fingers slipped on the slick surface, but I dug in, feeling the bud-like node's grip. The edge of the vine rattled in my hand like a lifeline. I wrapped it around my wrist and hauled myself upward, boots slipping but catching on mossy bark. Rain washed over me as I swung my legs up and scrambled onto the bank. Mud splattered across my face. I heard their curses behind me, splashes as they lunged after. I hooked an elbow over the vine and hoisted myself 'ire feet, finding purchase on thick roots. My jeans snagged, ripping at the knee, but I ignored the pain. I scrambled forward to the cluster of vines overhead, then swung across the channel in one fluid arc. I landed hard on the opposite bank, heart hammering the vine, slipping through my gloved hand as I did. I rolled to absorb impact, popping a rib. Pain spiked, but it was nothing compared to the betrayal I'd escaped. The swirling water glinted at my side, and I leapt to my feet, pressing forward into the undergrowth without glancing back. Rain blurred the forest around me. Branches slapped my arms, roots tugged at my ankles, but I ran, fueled by rage, shock, and relief. Behind me, I could hear the jaguar group's shouts fading into the distance, their shuffling pursuit lost amidst thunder and thunderous roars of water. My breath rasped in my chest, pain radiating from my bleeding shoulder. The whisper of betrayal echoed in my bones. Even kindness here could be a ruse. Yet, as I fled deeper into the green gloom, my heart pulsed with resolute clarity. I would survive this attempt, and every moment of betrayal would steel me for the final confrontation yet to come. My lungs burned and my legs trembled as I pressed through the dripping undergrowth, leaving the river's roar and betrayal behind. Rain still fell in sheets, plastering leaves to my face and filling the air with the sharp scent of wet wood. Each footfall sank into heavy mud, and every step threatened to send me sprawling back into that treacherous channel. But I could not stop. The only way forward and upward lay in the colossal form I glimpsed through the trees, the kapok tree, its massive trunk disappearing into the green vault above. I recalled the map's rough markings. This tree stood near a high ridge, its buttress roots forming natural steps leading skyward. If I could climb it, I might gain a vantage point far above the canopy, perhaps spotting the river's bend, a passing canoe, or even the distant plume of smoke from a settlement. It was my last hope. The terrain sloped upward, and I hauled myself forward. My hands smeared with mud, I brushed vines aside and tested every root before trusting my weight. The forest floor gave way to a patch of exposed buttresses, bulbous flanged roots extending from the trunk in sweeping arcs. Thick moss coated them, but with careful footing, they promised the first footholds of my ascent. I paused before the lowest root, thigh-high and slick. Backing away, I searched for dry bark or rough patches. A finger's width strip of bare wood glowed faintly in the rain. I braced one boot against it, planted my hands on adjacent buttresses, and pulled upward. My muscles quivered under the strain, but I inched up. The tree's living bark pressed against my back, cool and reassuring, as though the kapok itself lent strength to desperate climbers. Above me, a knot of vines formed a natural ladder. I slipped a gloved hand around one and tested its weight. It held. I looped both arms into the vines and hauled body over root ledges. The muscles along my arms, back, and shoulders ached with every pull, but upward was freedom. My soaked shirt clung to my skin, the cold rain now a background rhythm rather than an assault. Halfway to the first branch, I paused to catch my breath. Beneath me, the ground was a roiling mosaic of green and brown, the river a silver flash winding through treetops. I touched the trunk, feeling the kapok's fibrous bark soft, yet surprisingly sturdy. A small heart swelled with defiance. Each inch upward was another lie betrayed, another trap survived. I resumed climbing. The vines shifted and creaked under my weight, but held fast. My fingers closed around fern-fringed root knobs, guiding me higher. Insects chirped undisturbed by my ascent, and a toucan squawked overhead before flitting out of sight. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and thin shafts of light broke through. My left boot slid on a mossy ledge, sending a jolt of panic through me. I pressed my palms flat against the trunk, calves straining to keep me anchored. A slip here would send me tumbling several meters to jagged buttresses below. I forced my heart to slow, exhaling in measured bursts. Sweat and rain blurred my vision as I focused only on the next handhold. Higher still, I reached the first stout, horizontal branch thicker than my torso. I hauled my weight up until my torso lay against the branch, then swung a leg around it and dropped my weight onto it with a muffled thud. My pack clinked and slid into place, but I held on every fiber, screaming in relief and exhaustion. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, offering thanks to the silent giants of the forest. Foam of rain dripped from leaves overhead, pooling in small hollows of bark. Below, the river's roar dimmed, transformed into a gentle hum carried on the wind. The world had shifted beneath me, no longer a claustrophobic green labyrinth, but a vast canopy stretching to the horizon. I crawled forward along the branch, moving toward a thicker fork that split upward. Each inch brought new views, distant hills swollen with mist, a patchwork of river loops, and far off a plume of smoke rising straight as an arrow. My heart leapt. That must be human habitation, perhaps a ranger station or remote village. Salvation tasted in the crisp air. At the fork, I wedged myself between two massive limbs. The rain had stopped entirely, and the sky shone bright through a gap in the canopy. I dug my boots into opposite roots and let my back rest against the smooth bark. Although wind gusted, I felt anchored. I unstrapped my water pouch from the pack's exterior and took a cautious sip, still enough for the final descent. I tilted my head, listening. There were no distant shouts of pursuit, no crack of gunfire. My body ached from head to toe, but adrenaline had not abandoned me. My shoulder wound throbbed where I'd been grazed, a dull ache beneath soaked fabric. I flexed my arm and tested my grip. It hurt, but I could climb down when the time came. Below me, the jaguar group's pursuit would stall. At this height, they lacked ropes or the boldness to follow me into the canopy. But I could not linger long. Night approached again, and cold would settle here with unrelenting chill. I needed to descend before darkness stole my balance and will. I studied the branch patterns, calculating the route down. A thick vine to my right arced downward to a secondary root tier. Below that lay a tangle of vines forming a hammock-like net between roots. If I could swing down onto it, the descent would be more forgiving than hammering into buttresses. I exhaled and gathered courage for the move. Unhooking my pack, I tied it to a stout branch above valuable supplies, stashed safely, preventing entanglement during my swing. I let it sway gently in the breeze. Then, grasping a vine with both hands, I pushed off the forked root and swung outward. Air rushed past, adrenaline spiking anew. As I neared the hammock of vines, I tucked my knees and braced for impact. I landed in a soft thud, swallowed by the swag of vines that cradled me. Twigs snapped beneath my weight, but the tangle held fast. I lay there dizzy as the canopy swayed. Branches bumped above, leaves brushed my face. Then I wriggled free, feet pressing against a lower root that served as a final step to solid ground. The forest floor welcomed me with a sigh of rustling leaves. I knelt and touched the earth, transformed by distance, no longer a trap-laced bed, but sacred ground marked by countless roots. I hugged my knees, head bowed, giving thanks to the kapok's living strength. Then I stood blinking in the fading light. I patted my pack where it sat beside tangled vines. Supplies remained a slender rope of vines I'd stripped earlier, the flint and whistle, the small first aid kit, and enough water for the final push. I slung the pack on and retrieved my machete, its blade still sharp. The path ahead would be treacherous, but survivable. Through the thinning undergrowth, I spotted the distant smoke, thin pale rising in the dusky sky. It marked my destination, people fire lamps, perhaps phones. A chance to end this nightmare. I oriented myself southeast, following the ridge's gentle slope. Each step felt buoyant, lifted by the kapok's gift of hope and sanctuary. As darkness settled and the forest's symphony rose anew, crickets, frogs, distant owls, I moved swiftly, yet cautiously. A final look over my shoulder revealed the kapok's silhouette towering above its buttresses, bathed in moonlight. A guardian in the gloom, I pressed onward toward the smoke, every step an echo of the climb to freedom. First light of dawn filtered through the canopy as I crested the final ridge, the ribbon of smoke now a clear column rising against a pale sky. Below me lay the river's great bend, a broad horseshoe of churning water, flanked by smooth stones and fallen trunks. And there, on a narrow beach, stood the jaguar group's camp, 3 crude tents of patched tarpaulin, a smoking fire pit, and silhouettes moving like sentries along the water's edge. My breath caught. They'd regrouped here after failing to catch me upstream. Their leader, the man who'd first dragged me from my tent, stood with arms crossed, watching a pair of hulking enforcers lug a long wooden canoe toward the water. Sunlight glinted off machetes strapped to belts and the barrels of their rifles. They'd clearly intended to trap me at the clearing, but I'd escaped, and now they had me cornered at the river's mouth. I pressed my back against a sapling heart, slamming against ribs. Around me, ferns trembled in the morning breeze. Birds called hesitantly as predators and prey paused to observe the human theater unfolding below. My pack felt heavy each step closer to the beach, a march into a firing line. Yet retreat was impossible. The dense undergrowth behind me offered no cover, and dawn's light would expose me in seconds. I sank to one knee, heart racing as I weighed my dwindling options. In my left hand, I gripped my machete, the only weapon I truly controlled. In my right, the flint and whistle. A spark might ignite a nearby patch of dried grass and vines, forcing them to scatter, but wind direction was uncertain. A whistle blast would draw attention and might trigger fellow trackers to converge, but not guarantee confusion. The river itself offered a final gambit. I could wade into the current and let the flow carry me past their line of sight, but downstream lay unknown rapids and jagged logs. Behind me, the kapok's roots curled like watchful fingers. I recalled the sacred ground's protection, the rituals, and I tapped my heart twice, then tapped the earth in unspoken plea for assistance from the spirits that had guided me this far. Perhaps they'd answer one last time. In a blistering moment of clarity, I made my choice. I would exploit the river's curve and the low sun's glare. If I could dive into the water at a point shadowed by an overhanging branch, I might slip past their line of sight, hidden in the morning's glare, and their assumption that I'd fled inland. It was a desperate gamble. If they spotted me, bullets would follow, but it offered the narrowest margin of escape. I rose and moved forward, crouching low and using a fallen palm trunk for cover. 10 meters from the beach, I paused behind the log chest, pressed to the weathered wood. The leader's sharp voice cut the air. "They're gone," he barked. "Search the reeds. They can't have gone far." Enforcers peeled off, stepping into the river's shallows, with rifles at the ready. Their boots sent ripples across the surface. I exhaled and listened downstream. The water churned more rapidly, beyond a hidden rapid, unsuitable for a canoe, but ideal cover, with bubbles and white foam. I weighed the distance, 20 meters of deceptive calm water, followed by the turbulent section. If I timed it right, entering the calm, submerging beneath the foam, just as I passed the enforcer's line of sight, I could re-emerge downstream beyond their position. I flexed my fingers around the machete's handle, then opened my pack for the whistle. I removed it and closed the flap softly. A single blast could draw 2 of the 3 enforcers away from the rapid's edge into the reeds, flipping their focus. Then, with a rock tossed toward the shoreline, I could provoke a distraction. I slid into position, drawing my knees to my chest behind the log. The early sun warmed my wet skin, turning droplets on leaves into gleaming jewels. I held the whistle to my lips, inhaled deeply, and waited for the leader to bark over there, pointing at a rustle in the ferns. 2 men broke from the shoreline and sprinted toward the undergrowth. That was my cue. I exhaled into the whistle, one long piercing note that shattered the morning hush. Startled birds exploded into flight overhead, and the 2 soldiers halted, rifles swinging toward me. They yelled confusion, brittle in their voices. I lobbed a small pebble into the weeds behind them crash, and they spun following the sound. I seized the moment. I pushed off the log and dove headfirst into the cool river limbs slicing through dark water. A bullet whined overhead, splashing near my shoulder as enforcers opened fire. I kicked hard, sending ripples forward. The log and beach vanished above me as I submerged. Underwater, the current jerked me downstream. I opened my eyes to a swirl of tannin-stained liquid and white bubbles from the rapid ahead. The roar of water thundered in my ears. I angled my body to ride the bubbles toward the river's inner curve, where a fallen trunk formed a pocket of turbulent foam. I held my breath and let the river cradle me, hidden beneath a curtain of froth, as the enforcers leaned over the edge, scanning in vain. Moments stretched into an eternity. My lungs screamed, my limbs trembled, but my mind remained razor-focused. When the bullet's echo fell away, I surged upward through the foam, cracking the surface with a gasp, and kicked toward the opposite bank, where thick reeds masked any splash. My arms churned as the current whipped me closer to a rocky shore lined with dense growth. Bullets struck the water behind me, pings of metal ricocheting. I ignored them, focusing on the bank's root mats. I wrapped fingers around a protruding root and hauled myself out, boots sliding in slick mud. I pressed my back against a tree trunk, gasping in broken breaths, water streaming from my hair and clothes. Behind me, the jaguar group's yells echoed across the channel, their frustration palpable. I wiped water from my eyes and looked downstream. The river curved again beneath a grove of trees, branches arching overhead. Beyond that bend, I glimpsed the river's exit into calmer waters and the distant shape of raised wooden stilts, perhaps a ranger station or fishing outpost. Salvation and safety lay just beyond my sight. I had only seconds. The bank was narrow, the current eager to drag me back into danger. I released the root and sprinted along the shoreline, muddy water sloshing in my boots. Each footfall was careful and swift, mired enough to slow pursuit, swift enough to put distance. Branches scrubbed my face, roots snared my ankles, but I didn't stop. A single rifle report cracked behind me, and I felt the sting of dust and debris at my hip, a grazing shot. Something slithered under my shirt, hot and abrupt. I bit back a scream, driving forward. The branchy tunnel of trees narrowed, but the water's edge smiled with open reeds. I plunged back into the shallows this time, wading with knees bent, splashing quietly toward the outpost. Bullets thudded into tree trunks around me, flashing through leaves. I dipped low, chin nearly brushing the water, every sense alive with fear and adrenaline. At last, the water shallowed to ankle depth. A wooden walkway rose before me, sturdy logs lashed together, leading to a small dock where a hut perched on stilts. Faint light glowed from within, casting warm ambers across window slats. I dashed forward, boots slapping the wood as I reached the hut's platform. Within a figure moved a ranger or fisherman, hat pulled low, spinning around as I burst through the doorway. "Help!" I gasped in English voice, ragged. "Please, gunmen along the river." He froze, then dropped his fishing pole and grabbed a radio on the wall. His voice crackled through static. "This is Outpost. 2 emergency gunmen on the riverbank. Send assistance." Outside, I heard the rapid sputter of a motor. A small skiff glided around the bend lights, cutting through dawn mist. Relief struck me like sunlight. I sank to the floor, chest, heaving limbs trembling as the radio barked back orders. "Hold position, reinforcements en route." The ranger offered me a canteen of fresh water, which I gulped like a man dying. Each swallow soothed the burning in my throat. I felt hands pressing against wounds, checking for bleeding. They bound my hip where the bullet's impact had lodged debris, but mercifully no shrapnel remained. Through the open door, I saw the river's current swirl, carrying away the foam and echoes of my nightmare. The Jaguar group's shouts faded, with the distance drowned by the radio's urgent chatter and the surging motor. I pressed my head against the hut's wooden wall and closed my eyes. After what felt like hours, but was mere moments, reinforcements, arrived a small team in a tougher patrol boat, rifles at the ready. They called out to the ranger, then approached my shelter weapons, trained along the shore. I stood raising a shaking hand, in greeting, words failing me. An officer climbed the walkway, pressed his badge against my palm, and said simply, "You're safe now." The weight of those words crashed through me. Tears welled as I realized the knife edge. I'd walked one misstep, from death, one moment's betrayal, from ruin. I exhaled, the full reality settling in. The Jaguar group was scattered, their plans thwarted. I had survived their ambush at the riverbank. Behind me, the river carried them away, and ahead the dawn's first rays promised a new beginning. My body trembled as I staggered onto the patrol boat's deck, the thrum of its engine a lifeline beneath my feet. The ranger's strong hands guided me toward a seat cushioned with soaked canvas. Rain still dripped from my hair, and clothes mingling with the sweat that clung to my skin like a second layer. I clasped the canteen he'd pressed into my hands and tipped my head back, draining it in greedy gulps. The fresh water felt miraculous, cool, pure, lifting the haze of dehydration from my mind. Behind us, the riverbank blurred as the patrol boat powered away, guided by 2 uniformed officers whose eyes scanned the canyon of trees lining the shore. The Jaguar group had vanished like smoke. Their desperate yells were swallowed by the jungle's roar. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, feeling my heart finally slow from its frantic race. My muscles sagged with relief exhaustion and the aftershock of betrayal. One of the officers, a tall woman with steel gray hair tucked beneath a cap, turned to me, her gaze sharp but kind. "You're safe now," she repeated, voice steady in my ears. "We'll get you medical care and take statements. Those men won't bother you again." She offered a small nod, and I managed a faint, grateful smile. The boat rounded a bend, revealing a cluster of wooden buildings strung along the river, an outpost that served as a lifeline to remote regions. Smoke rose from a cook fire near the largest structure, and a half-dozen figures bustled about, medics, botanists, and local guides. They wore mismatched clothes, mud-stained boots, wide straw hats, rain-slicked jackets, but their movements were efficient, unhurried. It felt strangely peaceful compared to the violent chaos I'd fled. I tried to focus on details. The faded mural of parrots on the building's side, the wooden sign painted Estacion Loreto, the flapping laundry hung on lines between poles, but my mind struggled to grip reality. Each sensation felt surreal: cool chairs under my thighs, the boat's gentle sway, the distant hammer of a metal tool shaping a canoe. A medic approached, carrying a small kit. She knelt and gently removed my soaked shirt around the graze on my hip, inspecting the pink-edged wound. "It's superficial," she said, dabbing antiseptic. "No bullets lodged. You're dehydrated and bruised, but you'll live." Relief bloomed so fast I felt dizzy. I closed my eyes, picturing the jungle's shadows receding behind me like a dark tide. "Thank you," I whispered, voice hoarse. She taped a fresh dressing over the wound, then pulled a blanket from a crate and tucked it around my shoulders. A light wind played through the open doorway, carrying the heady scent of damp earth and fresh coffee brewing somewhere beyond. I breathed it in, letting the aroma ground me in the present. The station manager, an older man with a bushy mustache, approached, extending a hand. "Welcome to Loreto," he said in accented English. "You've been through hell. Stay here, rest, and we'll arrange transport upriver to the nearest town. Family will be notified soon." His kindness pressed warm against my chest. I clasped his hand, voice catching. "Thank you, I thought I'd never make it." He shook his head. "Few do. You're strong, lucky, and prepared. You defied the jungle's traps and their violence. That's no small feat." He patted my shoulder, then turned to scan the riverbank through binoculars, likely watching for lingering threats. Farther down the shoreline, I spotted Ayari's carved staff, propped against a post half hidden in shadows. My chest tightened. The man who guided me and betrayed me was still out there somewhere in the maze of emerald. I pictured his sharp eyes and the sudden twist of his kindness into cruelty. I wondered if he'd been punished by the spirits after betraying sacred ground, or if he'd slipped away haunted by his own motives. The question unsettled me, but for now I let it fade. A soft voice at my elbow startled me. It was the ranger who'd first radioed for help, the one who'd ushered me onto the boat. He offered a Sol thermos. "Hot mate tea," he said with a grin. "It'll restore your core." I took it gratefully, savoring the warm bitterness that spread through me. The heat chased away the chill of rain and fear. Outside, sky cleared to reveal a wash of pastel dawn, rose and gold streaked through drifting clouds. The canopy beyond the riverbank glowed with new light, each leaf outlined in gentle radiance. It reminded me of the rituals among the standing stones, how the forest itself could bless and test in equal measure. Today, it blessed me anew. I sipped the tea and closed my eyes, letting the warmth settle. My thoughts drifted to the river's edge, silver ribbons winding through the heart of the Amazon, both highway and trap. I'd crossed it countless times, in fear emerging battered but unbroken. Now I would cross again, this time, to safe harbor, to family, and eventually to a world that felt alien after days in the green abyss. The station bustled with life medics, moving between beds, a researcher examining leaf samples, local guides loading supplies for a downstream run. I watched them with gratitude and a twinge of melancholy, their routines simple compared to the extraordinary ordeal I'd endured. But this place too was extraordinary, a nexus of human compassion and natural wonder standing sentinel against the jungle's extremes. As I set the empty thermos on a wooden table, the station manager returned with a small radio. "Your group is organizing a recovery team," he said. "Your family knows you're alive. They'll be here in 2 days." Relief cascaded through me in gentle waves, each breath lighter than the last. I pictured their faces, grief turned to joy, disbelief to profound gratitude. Night's shadows and betrayals felt distant like a fevered dream. Yet the scars on my hip, on my soul, would remain. I would carry them as proof of survival, proof that hope could endure even in the darkest places. I looked once more through the open doorway at the emerald beyond the river, bending toward the horizon. Somewhere along its curves lay the path I'd forged through snares, camps, rituals, and treacheries. I'd proven that the human spirit could navigate even the most hostile of realms. A breeze stirred the curtain of vines at the doorway, and a single leaf fluttered inside, settling on the floor between my boots. I bent, touched it, and pressed it to my chest as a silent tribute to the forest's paradox, wild and unforgiving, yet capable of granting salvation to those who dared to respect and endure. I rose slowly, gathering my pack and the first aid kit. My joints protested, but each movement felt anchored by purpose. 2 days until my family arrived, days for rest, reflection, and the slow process of healing. As I stepped outside into the station's bustling light, I carried with me the echoes of laughter in the camp, the sting of betrayal under starlight, the sacred rituals among ancient stones, and the thunderous pulse of the river that both hunted and freed me. The Amazon had tested me relentlessly, carving fear and resilience into my bones. Now I walked away not as a victim, but as someone reborn by the wild's crucible, scarred, humble, yet indomitable. The patrol boat's diesel hum faded into a steady lull beneath my racing heart as I settled into the station's guest quarters. Daylight streamed through slatted shutters, drawing slanted bars of heat across the wooden floor. Outside, the Amazon's green walls swayed under the morning breeze, a living tapestry that both threatened and sheltered. I pressed my palm to the wall, feeling the wood's grain, and thought of every step that had brought me here, from the first wrong turn in the undergrowth to the final plunge into foaming water. My wounds had begun to sting once the adrenaline ebbed. The superficial graze on my hip now throbbed beneath the fresh dressing, and bruises bloomed across my ribs where I'd tangled with Iari and the enforcers. A nurse collected my vitals, pulse still high temperature normal, but skin clammy. She nodded approvingly at my resilience and left me to rest. I closed my eyes, the station's gentle activity, a balm to frayed nerves, muffled conversation, the hiss of the kitchen stove, the distant scrape of a canoe being repaired. I rose and walked to a small desk by the window. On it lay a crumpled piece of paper, the warning from Grupo Jaguar, now pinned under a smooth river stone. Beneath it, a photograph I'd tucked in my pack, my family smiling on the riverbank back home. I traced the edges of that photo with a fingertip and felt tears well, but they stayed behind clenched eyelids. Instead, I lifted the paper and the stone folded the note and placed both in a journal I'd found. I'd need to remember every detail, every betrayal, every act of kindness, every narrow escape. Footsteps approached. A station guide knocked and entered, carrying a tray of fruit and coffee. Bananas, mango, and papaya glowed like embers in the morning light. He set the tray down, nodding. Eat. Your strength returns quickly, with good food. He spoke softly in Spanish, accent gentle. I offered my thanks and selected a sliced mango, its sweetness a revelation after days of bland rations and muddy water. I sipped the coffee strong, earthy, touched with cinnamon, and let its warmth seep into my bones. Each swallow felt like a small triumph. At the station manager's invitation, I retold my ordeal to a small group, 2 medics, a botanist, and the guide. They listened without interruption, eyes widening at each twist, especially the betrayal by Ayari and the final ambush at the river bend. When I finished, silence hung before the botanist spoke. You carried this jungle's stories in your blood, she said softly. Few can say that and live. Her words comforted me. I realized that my journey had become part of this place's living history, intertwined with its trials and its mercy. Later, I ventured outside. The river stretched wide, a mirror reflecting cobalt sky and emerald canopy. Canoes drifted with fishermen casting nets. A pair of children chased ducks along the shore, laughter drifting over the water. The ordinary life here felt miraculous after the violence I'd endured. I inhaled deeply, tasting moisture and life. The station's small chapel, a simple structure of bamboo and palm thatch, beckoned. Inside, light filtered through colored panes, dust motes dancing in its glow. I knelt on a weathered pew, pressing my hands together. Words failed me, so I offered a silent prayer of gratitude for survival, for those who aided me, for the strength to face each trial. I felt an echo in my chest, as if the jungle itself acknowledged my plea. Returning to my quarters, I packed a small bag to join the recovery team upriver that afternoon. Inside, I placed the journal, my map now annotated with safe routes and warnings, and the photograph. I tucked the flint and whistle into an inner pocket, symbols of the defenses that had seen me through. My ready-made walking stick leaned in the corner, its wood polished smooth by my grip. As the sun climbed, I joined a group bound for the next outpost, my rescuers, my hosts, now companions, on the river's broad artery. We boarded a larger craft, its engine idling beneath a metal canopy. I climbed aboard last, pausing to look back at Estacion Loreto, a place of refuge born of human kindness set against elemental forces. I bowed my head in farewell to its wooden walls and the people who had saved me. The boat slipped away from the dock and the river's current claimed us. Waves lapped at the hull, carrying whispers of a journey almost completed. I stood at the railing, wind tugging at my hair and clothes. Below, the water rushed past, indifferent and eternal. I pictured the jaguar group disperse their schemes, undone, the jungle absorbing their threats into its vast memory. Ahead lay villages carved from forest towns on stilts. Finally, a bridge to the world beyond the Amazon's womb. I thought of home, the faces that would greet me, the warm embrace of family. My heart clenched at the thought of their fear turned to relief. Soon I would see them. I closed my eyes and let the river's motion rock me, every sense attuned to the moment: the scent of damp wood, the call of a distant heron, the hum of the engine, the beating of my own heart. Whispers of hope flooded through me, soft promises that even in the darkest depths, light could be found. I saw a path. Survival was not just escaping death, but carrying forward with purpose. I opened my eyes to where the river curved beneath high banks, sunlight glinting on moving water. Ahead, the forest's edge gave way to wooden dwellings and dirt paths. We would dock soon, and with that landing, my ordeal would shift into memory, a crucible from which I emerged, changed, tempered by fear, and fortified by compassion. I turned from the railing as voices called for my attention. Stepping toward new beginnings, I carried the Amazon's lessons in my bones and the whisper of hope in my chest, ready to reclaim a lake reborn by survival's fire. The boat's gentle sway lulled my trembling limbs as I watched the jungle's edge recede into mist. Each tree carried stories older than any map, and each ripple on the water held the memory of my flight. Every trap evaded, every betrayal endured, every breath seized against impossible odds. My muscles, once taut with fear, now softened, uncoiling as relief settled in. The steady hum of engines and the murmur of companions became a lullaby that washed away adrenaline's last echoes. In the hush between ripples, I felt the forest's embrace shift from threat to farewell. Cicadas droned a fading hymn, and parrots wheeled overhead in silent arcs of color. The sun leaned low, bathing the waterway in amber light that danced on wet bark. I pressed my fingertips to the journal, cradled on my lap, its pages bearing the map of my ordeal and the fragments of my spirit. Each line I had scribed marked a victory over the shadows of doubt, the relentless hunger, the sting of betrayal, and the wildness of nature itself. My chest rose and fell in a measured rhythm. The wound on my hip throbbed gently, a reminder of pain transformed into survival. I reflected on kindness found in unexpected faces: the ranger, whose radio call summoned me back from oblivion, the medics who mended my flesh, and even the forest spirits that seemed to guide my steps. In those moments of compassion, I discovered a truth more powerful than fear: connection offered sanctuary. As the riverbank slowed its passage and the silhouette of civilization emerged, simple homes, dusty pathways, children playing by the water, I felt buoyed by gratitude. My journey from terror to safety had tested every ounce of will, but also revealed an unbreakable thread of hope. In the Amazon's crucible, I learned that the human spirit, when tempered by courage and compassion, could rise above even the deepest darkness. Now, as dusk settles and city lights approach, I close my eyes and listen to the river's steady promise that survival is not merely an escape from death, but a passage toward light, toward love, and toward the whisper of peaceful days to come.